Chapter 7 Weeping Willow. The kitchen was quiet, except for the sounds of rustling papers and the percolating pot on the stove. Engrossed in his paper, he didn't hear the steaming pot gurgle, but the rich odor of the coffee finally caught Larry's nose and he looked up. Where's Rachel? She's always up before the coffee's done. Annoyed with the interruption, he turned off the burner and poured himself a cup, then returned to his reading. The back door was open and the sounds of a crisp Sunday morning of early summer drifted into the room, unnoticed by his ears, while he was engrossed in other places where life made the news. Finally, a neighbor's lawnmower broke the silence in the air and his mind came back to the kitchen, remembering it was breakfast time and he had a lot to do. He folded the paper and stood up, feeling the aches of muscles not used in a long time, and was suddenly irritable. It's her fault I'm sore, and where the hell is she? He went to the stairwell and listened. There was no sound from the bedroom. Rachel, goddammit, get up. It's 8 o'clock. Get down here and fix breakfast. He tapped his fingers on the stair rail and listened again. He heard her moan something, then went off to the backyard to finish up the work on his car that he had started the day before, satisfied she had heard him. Rachel sat up in bed and hung her head in her hands. She had a splitting headache. She ignored the pain through several sleepy stabs at the snooze alarm, but Larry's sharp voice woke her to the pain and she moaned. She heard the sparrows chirping in the cottonwood outside her open window and looked out. Why a headache on such a nice morning? The pain was so bad that she stood shakily and walked by the toilet and went right to the shower. She stooped to turn on the water and the throbbing got worse as she saw red stars amid a yellow background dance around the faucet. She slipped out of her nightgown and stepped into the spray, quickly losing the chill from the open bedroom window, and sighed as the water kneaded her pale skin, smoothing away goosebumps. As the steamy warmth woke her more fully, she set the water even hotter and adjusted the shower head for a pulsating rhythm, then stuck her face into the spray, hoping the water would take the pain away. After a few minutes, she turned around and let the pulsations massage her neck, allowing herself to sag into the steady stream of cascading water. She couldn't help herself, as bright yellow urine trickled down her legs and mingled with the sparkling clear water at the drain. She relaxed her muscles and let go. Embarrassed to lose control, but relieved not to fight the urge any longer, she put her hands to her chest and firmly slid them down over her breasts onto her lower stomach, then stroked the skin over her kidneys and bladder, trying to avoid the headache with the rest of her nocturnal accumulations. It worked. When she was done, the headache was gone. She looked out the bathroom window as she emerged from the shower and saw Larry working on the car. She better get breakfast ready soon, or he'd be in a worse mood than she sensed he already was. He hung his portly frame over the fender of the old Ford and wheezed as he tried to tighten the few remaining lower bolts on the water pump. Long since out of shape, he winced as the wrench slipped, then stood up to catch his breath and wipe the blood oozing from a scraped knuckle on his pudgy finger. Damn these old bolts. And even after he changed the pump, what other damage did she do by driving home yesterday with the pump squealing as it spewed water from the burned-out impeller bushings and the radiator nearly empty? Women. They kept more auto parts stores in business than all the potholes in China. He returned to his task and continued to mutter under his breath, hoping the threads in the engine block didn't strip as he tightened the bolts. He had a love-hate relationship with his car, much like his feelings about women in general and Rachel in particular. He couldn't afford a newer one and disliked spending money to fix it, but it gave him a sense of manly accomplishment to keep it running. And he could take his frustrations out on the old thing. It didn't talk back. Cars and women, you had to have them, but they got old and weren't much fun anymore. He tightened the last bolt and took another break, his face sweating profusely. As he wiped the grease from his wrench and sweat from his brow, he looked at the kitchen window and saw Rachel wasn't downstairs yet. He was about to go in the house and drag her out of bed, but saw the bathroom light go on and decided to just wait and give her hell again when she finally called him to eat. She stood in front of the mirror naked, toweling her hair dry and looking at herself. Like most women, she saw only the signs of age on her body and face, but if a stranger were to look in that same mirror at her, he would see something much different than she imagined, for she was quite beautiful. The product of Bulgarian parents with a touch of Welsh Irish gave her the look of a gypsy, only with a softer edge, like someone you might find reading tarot cards at a psychic fair, with deep green eyes to offset her long raven hair, and a firmness of face that told of an inner strength. Her body was still smooth and sensual, and the birthing of 2 children did not rob her of firm, upturned full breasts, or a flat, inviting torso. Only her full hips with small, spidery stretch marks told of virginity lost. She combed her hair with her fingers and tied it back, then quickly dressed and went down to the kitchen to start breakfast. As she prepared his food, she looked out the window at him and sighed. She could tell by his demeanor that he was more ill-tempered than she thought, and it was probably her fault again, though she could never understand what she did to make him unhappy. He added water to the radiator, then leaned over the grill to look at something under the hood as his shirt pulled up and his baggy pants drooped to show his flabby midriff and his hairy back. She looked at him, not seeing the repulsive sight for what it was, but only for what it represented, his repulsive mood. If beauty was only skin deep, then surely ugliness must find its outlet, and for her it came in his mannerisms and habits, for she could love unabashedly his ugly body if it contained something pleasant on the inside. But he had a selfish ugliness that transcended his appearance, and she didn't want to admit it to herself, for she was too innocent to see him for what he was. She could only see him as a reflection of something wrong with her, as if his selfishness was simply a matter of her not understanding his needs. She set the table and called him in to eat, hoping to cheer him with a well-cooked meal. As he wiped his greasy hands on his dirty pants and grabbed his fork, she placed a huge plate of food in front of him. His standard fare of 4 eggs, over easy, 6 sausage patties, 4 pieces of toast, and an ample portion of hash browns. He put salt and pepper on everything, poured ketchup on the hash browns, then dug in while she sat down and buttered a bran muffin, and then poured herself a tomato juice. "It's a beautiful morning," she said, looking out the back door. "Yeah, it would be even nicer if I didn't have to fix a damn car. Is it going all right?" She looked at his dirty hands as he licked ketchup from his fingers. "I don't know yet. I'll find out after I start it up. You should have pulled over and turned it off when you heard the noise. How many times have I told you to watch the gauges?" He pointed his fork at her. "The heat gauge must have been all the way to hot." "Sorry, I wasn't far from home. I just thought—" "Well, don't think, okay? Just do what you're told. Shit, you could have blown a head gasket." He tore into the eggs. "Give me a couple more eggs. This one's hard. I don't like hard eggs." She quickly put 2 more in the skillet, then tried to change the subject. "I thought we'd go to the store and pick out some wallpaper today. I'd like to start the living room and—" "Wallpaper? Place looks fine to me. Why waste money on this old house?" "Well, we've been here almost 4 months now. We could make it look really cute with some paper and things." She put the eggs on his plate. "Look, we went through this with the last place we're in. It's just a rental. Why spend money on something that isn't even ours?" "I talked to the landlord a week ago. He said we could buy the house on a contract for deed if we wanted to." She looked into his face for a moment, then looked away. She saw no enthusiasm there. "Look, I've told you before, we don't need a house for Christ's sake." He finished his eggs. "Besides, I was talking to Walt at work. He says there's a guy he knows in Indiana who's looking for more help in his shop, and it pays $2 an hour more than I'm getting at Wilson's." "Larry, I thought we were gonna—" "Not again, please, Lord." "I thought you'd be excited. How are we going to get ahead if we don't move around?" He was perplexed. Why does she always get this way whenever a good job comes along? If I only got some support around here, maybe we wouldn't be so poor. "It's just that things were going so well at your job, and you talked about a promotion, and, well, it's nice to be close to home again. It's—" "Come on, Rachel, who cares about your family? We did okay all these years without them. You know I can't stand your sister's meddling anyway. Besides, they gave the promotion to Sam, so what's the sense of hanging around?" "Relatives. You can pick your friends, but you can't pick—" "We said we were going to try this time. It's been 25 years of moving, and the kids are closer now, and—" She fought back tears as she cleared the table. "If I cry, he'll just get mad and walk away. Oh, God, It's been so nice to be able to see my sisters again after all those years of moving around. I really thought this time we found a home. I'm so tired, Larry. Please. It's a shitty job anyway. I'll call Indiana on Monday. The discussion was over. He got up and went out to work on the car again. He installed the fan belts and radiator shroud, then started the engine and waited for it to warm up so he could check for water leaks. As he stood there looking at the pump, he thought about the job in Indiana. Why couldn't she be more supportive? So help me, if she tries that stunt of cutting her wrists again like that time we moved from Des Moines, Christ, I'm still paying the bills on that. And the looks I got from her mother and sisters when they came to visit her after. You'd think it was my fault she went loony. I feed her, I pay the bills, I never once hit her. Ah, shit. Water and steam started to pour from the engine block just below the right exhaust manifold. He leaned over the fender and pointed the trouble light at the problem. Of all the rotten luck, a frost plug had popped out. What did I tell her? She should have stopped the car as soon as the gauge read hot. Now the engine had overheated and blown a plug. But no, God damn it, she never listens. He couldn't manage to reach the plug opening from above, so he took out the bumper jack and lifted the front end of the car to allow his bulky frame to squeeze under the engine compartment. He crawled under and assessed the damage. The plug had fallen out, but was rusty and had to be replaced. Not only that, he would have to remove the starter motor and braces to get at the plug opening. Great, this is a 2-hour ordeal. He removed the battery connections, then gathered his tools under the car and began to take braces off to get at the starter, swearing at rusty bolts. Rachel cleaned the kitchen and watched through the kitchen window as his legs twisted and squirmed while he worked under the car. She saw the steam roll out from under the hood and heard him swearing, and knew it would do no good to talk to him about moving until he was in a better mood. She had no trouble watching him from a distance, for she didn't have to look in his eyes. Neither of them had looked into each other's eyes for many years. Their conversations were always directed to objects around the room when they talked. If the eyes are the window to the soul, then they had long since quit looking at each other. When they were young, when the group identity they shared in high school social circles transcended the individual, and before the time when egos learned to quit putting on airs and get their way, they looked at each other longingly, even lovingly. Most likely they saw what they wanted to see, but still there was a connection between them that had sparked a union that had lasted many years. She had looked into his dark brown eyes then, seeing a strength that could keep the cruel world at bay for her, and knew he was a man who could protect and provide, for she sensed his fierce independence and saw a self-reliance that only men seemed to have. And he had looked into her deep green eyes, seeing a beauty that could satisfy his needs, and a woman who could give him a feeling of place, for he saw in her a permanence that only women seemed to have. But now, as he worked in the car and she watched him through the window, neither of them could recall the looks in each other's eyes that had once drawn them together, for he had long since become uneasy with her gaze, sensing a need he couldn't provide for, and she had long ago quit looking into his, sensing a creative yearning that had nothing to do with her. Yet habit was stronger than truth, and neither of them wanted to change their lives or to look for someone else, for as far as they could tell, those of the opposite sex were all alike. And as with most marriages, it wasn't a matter of blatant abuse by either party. It was simply a lack of connectiveness. She wanted to provide a kind of hominess he had no desire for, while he wanted to provide a kind of superficial protection she didn't need. "Rachel, come here a minute," he yelled, not wanting to crawl out from under the car. Startled from her thoughts, she hurried out back and leaned over the fender, peering into his greasy face, partially hidden by the engine he labored on, while he held a wrench in one hand and a hammer in the other. "You okay? Is something wrong?" "Yeah, I'm okay. I need a third hand. There's a crowbar next to the toolbox. Get it, and put it right here." He pointed to the starter motor. She stuck the bar under the starter, and he showed her how to pry up on it. Then he rapped on the starter with a hammer. "Don't let go or the damn thing will fall on my face." He hit it several more times, but it didn't move, so he grabbed it with both hands and wiggled it. The car began to rock on the bumper jack. Shouldn't you put the car on blocks or something? The car's moving. It's okay. I never had a car follow me yet. Just keep holding the bar. He grunted and bit down on his upper lip. Finally the starter moved. Okay, let up on the bar slowly. He laid the starter on the ground, then crawled out from under the car and wiped his face on his sleeve. I gotta walk to the auto parts store. Don't go taking off with one of your sisters while I'm gone. I need your help cutting down the willow tree when I finish the car. He checked his billfold to see if he had enough cash for the part, then turned to leave. The weeping willow? Can't you just leave it? It's not our tree to worry. Look, I told you last week, after that storm knocked half its branches off and split the main trunk, I called the landlord. He said if I cut it down, he'd take $100 off of next month's rent. Besides, I don't have to haul it away, just chop it up. We gonna argue over a dumb tree? But Larry, I like that tree. It's the only one in the backyard. We could band the trunk to fix the break. It'll grow back. Hey, I'm not passing up a fast $100. It'll be easy. I borrowed Walt's chainsaw. He turned and walked toward town, shaking his head. Who the hell cares? We won't be living here if I get that job in Indiana anyway. Rachel watched him walk away, then turned to look at the willow. So what if some of its branches were gone? It was a beautiful tree, nearly as old as the house and over 40 feet tall, with a large trunk that was out of proportion to its size from all the trimming it had over the years. She went over to it and gave it a big hug, barely able to embrace its girth. He's jealous. I talk to you more than I talk to him. She liked trees. They were so permanent, and this gentle giant had watched its share of people come and go from its perch, alone in the backyard, the only willow on a block full of maples and elms. She looked at her flowers in the garden at the edge of the yard that she had planted in the spring. How will they fare in the hot sun without the willow shade? I chose them to go with the tree. They're here for each other. She sat in her swinging chair under the tree for a few minutes, then got up and went to the house and did something she hadn't done in many years. The old shoebox was still buried in a packing box in the back of the closet, unopened since her last move. After she found it, she carefully untied the pink ribbon around it and dug out an old letter from the bottom of her pile of mementos, then tucked the letter in her pocket and put the shoebox on the closet shelf. After arranging the packing boxes as they were before she rummaged through them, she went back outside and sat in the swinging chair. When she took out the letter and looked at the neat writing on the envelope, a lump came to her throat and her breathing quickened. How long had it been since she had last read those words? Larry returned from the parts store whistling as he walked. They had what he wanted, and it only cost a few dollars. If he was lucky, this would fix the car, and he could get the tree cut down before mid-afternoon. He saw Rachel sitting in the chair under the willow and waved to tell her he was back, but she didn't see him. What was she holding? Looks like a letter, probably from her mother. She just can't seem to get away from her family, even after I bitched her out for calling them all the time. It was 25 miles in long distance. The damn phone bill got out of hand. So what does she do? Writes everybody at least once a week. Hell, I don't see my family but once a year at Christmas. What's the big deal? He crawled under the car with his new frost plug and began his grunting and swearing again, still thinking about Rachel's family. It wasn't that they were such bad people, but damn it, every time she's around them, I get the feeling I'm an outsider. The look she gives her sisters, especially Evelyn, the one married to that no-good drunk. Even I don't get looks like that, and I'm her husband. And that time years ago when we were flat broke, they sent her some money, as if I can't take care of my own family. That was an ugly scene we had with her mother, but at least she hasn't tried to give us anything since then. Mothers, always meddling. I'm glad mine quit calling years ago. Let the old man put up with her. He put the wires back on the starter and thought about how much easier it was to deal with cars than people. Finally, he was caught up in the mechanics of his task and stopped thinking altogether. Rachel heard Larry under the car and looked to see that he was busy. She turned sideways in her seat and kept the car in sight. Then, satisfied he wouldn't come up to her unnoticed, she unfolded the faded yellowing pages of the letter and began to read. Dear Rachel, I've been here at college for almost 3 months now, and it seems like eternity. I miss our old gang and the fun we had last summer after graduation, but most of all I miss you. I know you've been seeing a lot of Larry this year, and he's a nice guy, but maybe we could be friends yet and see each other when I come home to visit. If it's that serious between you two, I'll understand if you tell me to butt out. Rachel, I know I've never let on how much I like you, but since third grade when you kicked me in the shins, you've been the most important person in my life, and now that I'm away from home, I don't miss anybody but you. All these years I watched you when you weren't looking, and even took care of things that bothered you. Remember old man Murphy in 6th grade, when he shot at your cat with a BB gun? I was the one who stole his gun and punctured his tire, leaving him a note about looking out for ricocheting bullets. I know you thought your brother did that, but honest, he didn't like your cat either. He told me it's too bad old Murphy was such a bad shot. I don't mean to brag or anything. It's just that I've watched so many people be mean to you over the years. I want you to know I think you're the most beautiful person in the whole world, and I don't ever want to hurt you. I'm coming home for Christmas in a few weeks, and I'll give you a call. I've got a surprise for you. I was at an antique store the other day, and something just seemed to draw me to it. I got the strangest feeling about it, and I want you to have it, whether we can be friends or not. See you in a few weeks. Love, Brian. She rocked gently in the chair as she looked at his signature and touched it, then closed her eyes, trying to recall memories more faded than the words on the paper. What a surprise the letter had been when it came, and the warm feelings it gave her. Even now, after all these years, it transported her back to high school days and that summer after graduation, just like an old song on the radio. Brian was always around, but wasn't. He had a quiet way that made you forget he was there, but if he was missing, you knew the group wasn't complete. When he went off to college, she assumed he would always be a part of her life, even if she didn't see him very often. They didn't say much to each other on that late August day when he stopped by her house before he left for college, but as he gave her that smile like no one other than Brian could give, and awkwardly ran his fingers through his unkempt sandy hair as he said goodbye, she just knew that their friendship was the best kind, the kind that needed no words, and where one could pick up right where you left off in a conversation, even if months or years had passed. So when the letter came that December, she was surprised that he asked to be friends because they both knew that they were, but warmed that thoughts long held within were out in the open, and warmed even more by feelings he expressed that were deeper than she realized. His concern about her relationship with Larry was just like Brian. He would never want to upset anyone, and was always careful about people's feelings. Sure, she and Larry had been more or less a couple since junior high, but she sensed that a wider world awaited for her after graduation, and didn't want to rule out a life without him if the stars took them in separate directions. And Brian's letter could be the start down a different path. Larry was always slightly uneasy about Brian, maybe because he saw the looks they gave each other without knowing they were doing it, almost as if they were siblings or kindreds in a conspiracy. Like the time the group went for a midnight swim in the gravel pit that last summer. There was a full moon in the starlit sky, and after swimming they sat around a fire, huddling in blankets and talking carefree nonsense. Brian and Rachel looked at each other in the flickering glow of the flames with darting glances that went unnoticed by the others amid the chatter. But Larry saw the looks, and in his typical bravado, took her away from the gathering and made her swim with him until the rest went home. Though he played the manly role with his friends, he had a keen intuition, and knew that night could be a turning point for him and Rachel. The willow tree rustled in the breeze, its branches swaying as if to touch her. She reached out and held a new budding leaf in her hand, then let go. But what did it all matter now? She looked down at the letter, a tear forming in her eye. This is all I have left of him. How I wish I had sent a reply. But it was just 3 weeks, he said. How was I to know that he would die in a fiery crash on that slippery road on the way home for Christmas? Dear God, what an awful time. The gang never was the same after that. Maybe we would have all gone our separate ways anyways, but Brian's death seemed to mark the end of our innocence, as if to say, get on with your lives, they could end any time. Larry was quiet at the funeral and never talked about Brian after that. Was it because he knew how I felt about him? He changed then, seemed more sure about us, and... Son of a bitch, muttered Larry. Rachel looked up, pulled from the past to the present by his guttural curse and the clanging of his slip wrench on the frame. It echoed like a gong and woke her to Larry's close presence and his continuing battle with the car. She looked at the old Ford. It was rocking on the bumper jack again. She couldn't bear to look and turned her head. Why is he so reckless? She forced herself to look at him again as a feeling of concern came over her. He doesn't deserve this. He tries so hard to provide for us, and I sit here thinking of somebody else. So what about a silly letter from an infatuated high school friend? Brian probably would have changed over the years anyway. Look at Evelyn's husband. He was so sweet the first few years. Why should I regret my life with Larry? He's never looked at anyone else, except that time 2 years ago, but that wasn't his fault. No, he deserves more. The melancholy that had overcome her in Des Moines began to well up again, and leaden hands sunk into her lap as a weariness set in, a weariness that had grown from too many years of pondering her predicament with no solution to relieve it. She didn't want to think about Des Moines, but the thoughts came anyway, uncontrollable, as if they had a life of their own. It was a bad time. They were going to move again, and the children hadn't been to visit in nearly a year. They were like their father, independent and unconcerned with family ties, and both had been married and divorced before they were 23. She was a long way from home, and it was too far to visit the family, even on a long weekend, and her sense of loneliness was profound. When Larry suggested a week off work to drive home for their 25th class reunion, she was ecstatic. It was a chance to see both her old friends and family, and to renew herself with the touchstones in her life. But it was to be a disappointment and a turning point instead. When they came home, many of her family were on vacation, and only a few of their group came to the reunion. Still, it was a joy to be back. The experience of seeing old friends who were truly looking old gave her the unsettled feeling of being old herself, but the warm sense of permanence she felt with these kindred spirits of her youth far outweighed the shock of seeing wrinkles and bald heads. Then Linda Warner showed up. Linda was married shortly after graduation to a career Navy man who was 10 years her senior. They traveled the world and had no children, living a carefree life until he died of a heart attack the year before. She had occasionally socialized with them, and Larry had dated her a few times before he and Rachel became serious, but she wasn't part of their group. She wandered over to their table after dinner, just before the dance, and before Rachel realized it, Linda was more than enjoying Larry's company. When the band started to play, she told him to dance with Linda, but he bashfully declined. Still, she stayed at their table until the reunion was over, and they talked of old times and about friends they all knew. Rachel saw the look in Linda's eyes. It was obvious to everyone, but she saw it in Larry's eyes too, even though it wasn't intentional, and she doubted he was even aware of his own rising interest in her. When they returned to Des Moines after the reunion, she thought about Linda and Larry and how they had hit it off so well. Linda loved to move around and had no sense of place, nor did she care much about family. She seemed down to earth and didn't talk about money. She even came to the dance in an old Ford like theirs. She swore like Larry too, laughing heartily at the same dirty jokes he laughed at. And the looks she gave him, they weren't the looks of a silly high school girl. No, that would be easy to pass off. They were the looks of genuine interest and caring, the kinds of looks she herself didn't give him. Linda had written Larry 2 letters, but he didn't reply, and had made it a point to show them to Rachel, but she could tell he thought about her. Then one night, a few months before they were to move, Larry came home from bowling after one too many beers, and was in an amorous mood. As they made love, he called out Linda's name. She bit her lip and realized she wasn't the only one with a fantasy, even though he repressed it. Whether from guilt or true compassion, she decided to let him enjoy it, So as he became more excited, she dug her nails into his back and talked dirty into his ear, talked like she imagined Linda would talk if he was inside her. And it worked. He was more intense in his love-making than she had ever remembered him to be. Afterwards came the melancholy and despair, deep and unsolvable, culminating in the act to end her life. She came back, the pain buried beneath the superficial recovery and the distraction of sheer routine, but the pathos never went away. It was always near the surface. She looked out into the backyard, trying to shake her thoughts. Why did I dig out this old letter? Look what it does to me. Larry, I'm so sorry. She clutched the letter in her hand and looked toward her flower garden, eyes unfocused, halfway between the past and the present, caught between sleep and wakefulness as the sounds of the car motor droning in the background impinged on her thoughts. Rachel, come here. I think it's fixed. There's... Larry looked at Rachel. She was asleep in the chair. Never mind, let her sleep. I think she had another migraine last night. She tossed and turned till I got up this morning. He looked at the engine again, added more water to the radiator, and put on the cap to pressurize the system, then crossed his fingers. 10 minutes went by. No leaks. Great. He let it run while he picked up his tools, then shut off the engine and checked the oil dipstick for water. It was okay. The head gasket hadn't blown. He slid in the front seat of the car to rest, his feet dangling out the open door, tired from his work, but pleased it was over. A slight breeze rocked Rachel's chair and rustled the willow branches over her head, some of them almost touching her, as she slept quietly with her chin on her chest. Larry looked at her again, this time with a thoughtful expression. He seldom thought about her, his mind usually on other things. Like most men, he was either busy doing something or thinking about what he was going to do next. But sometimes a lull in his activities gave him pause to just ponder, and this was one of those rare times. She really likes that tree. Hell, I think the tree likes her. I've even seen her talk to it when she didn't know I was looking. Maybe I could band it like she said, no, if I give in on this, she'll have me wallpapering the damn house next. I'll cut it down after lunch. I'll let her have a good nap, and she'll be in a better mood when it's time to help. He went to the house to make a sandwich, still full from breakfast, but not willing to wait for supper to eat next. He took 4 hot dogs from the refrigerator and laid them between 2 slices of bread, smothered them with ketchup, then downed the whole thing in 30 seconds. After a good belch, he went to the refrigerator again, took out the milk carton, and swigged half its contents, eyeing the back door in case Rachel came in. She hated to see him drink that way. He was just about to go out and wake Rachel when the phone rang. It was Walt. Good, he could tell him he'd bring the chainsaw back after supper. Walt had more information on the job in Indiana, so they talked about the move, both men excited to change jobs and towns. After that, they began to discuss their upcoming fishing trip as Larry let his lunch settle. He was in no hurry to tackle the Willow. Rachel had fallen asleep as the car droned in the background, her head throbbing again as the fatigue of unresolved thoughts floated in the background of her mind. Suddenly, an embolism in her brain that had caused her migraine headaches since childhood ballooned a final time in synchronization with her beating heart and burst, flooding her mind's eye with a deep scarlet flash mixed with fireworks of radiant yellow sparkles. The pain was tremendous, but before her hands could leave her lap in a reflex move to hold her head, her blood pressure dropped to 0 as blood poured from the ruptured vessel and her heart stopped in mid-beat. She slumped forward and exhaled her last breath, sending the chair into a tiny rocking motion just as the droning motor in the background went silent. As the back door to the kitchen closed, she was left to the solitude of her backyard, the smell of freshly cut grass in the air, and the lazy quiet of a neighborhood at rest on the midday of a bright and sunny summer Sunday, the silence broken only by the sporadic barks of a neglected dog far down the block. Her headache was gone. "Rachel, wake up," said a soft voice. A gentle nudge on her shoulder roused her, and she began to flutter her eyes. Then her nose twitched as she smelled the faint odor of hyacinth in the air. "Rachel, wake up," the voice said again. She opened her eyes and saw a hand on her shoulder, then looked up and found a pair of sparkling blue eyes staring at her. "Brian, what are you doing here?" She touched her forehead and rubbed the back of her neck. "Why, my headache's gone." She focused her attention on him. "Yes, the pain's over, Rachel," he said. "Come on, stand up. Let me get a look at you." He helped her to her feet. "Why, this is—" She looked around. The backyard was the same, but the colors were brighter. And the willow, it was full and tall. The split trunk was whole. She looked at him again, dumbfounded by his presence and the beauty of her surroundings. "Brian, it's so good to see you. I was just thinking about you and—" She gave him a big hug, then let go, and started to babble uncontrollably at him. He put his finger to her lips. "Whoa, just a minute. I've got something for you, and I've waited a long time for this." He reached down and picked up something at his side. It was an old picture in an antique gilded frame. "Merry Christmas, my love." He handed it to her with a big smile on his face. She looked at it in amazement. It was the picture of a young woman with raven black hair, sitting on a swinging chair under a willow tree, reading a letter on a cheery summer day. Standing behind her was the translucent figure of a young man with unkempt sandy hair, looking over her shoulder.